Hello and welcome to Postgres FM, a weekly show about all things PostgreSQL. I am Michael, founder of PG Mustard, and I'm joined as usual by Nikolai, founder of Postgres AI. Hey, Nikolai.
Hi, Michael.
And this week we have not one, not two, but three special guests with us to celebrate episode number 100. And we asked you, our listeners, for ideas for this episode, and we got some great suggestions, including the topic of scaling to 100 terabytes for episode 100. So we thought that was...
And beyond.
Oh, and beyond. Yes, always
Right.
beyond. Yeah, no downtime allowed. We're delighted to welcome three people who have successfully scaled Postgres exceptionally well, and those are Arka Ganguly from Notion. Hey, Arka.
Hey, good to be here. Really excited to talk about Postgres.
And hey, Sammy Steele from Figma.
Thanks so much for having me on.
And finally, Dirk van Veen from Adyen.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm honored.
We are honored to have all three of you. So yeah, thank you all for joining. So we're going to try a kind of panel roundtable style discussion. I'll play good cop, trying to keep us on track, but you are all welcome to chime in with questions for each other. And I know Nikolai will as well. So let's start on the simpler side of things. And starting with you, Dirk, would you mind letting us know what kind of things you're using Postgres for at Adyen there?
Well, that's an easy question. We keep our data within Postgres database. The thing is, we are processing financial transactions. And the thing about financial transactions is you'd better not lose them. Because if you have a social media kind of platform, right, and you refresh your page and you're missing a picture and refresh again, and the picture's there, nobody really cares. But if you refresh your bank app and your money is gone, then people, for some reason, they kind of freak out. So yeah, we try to not lose a single bit of data within our Postgres databases.
So you don't use data type money as well, right?
No.
I couldn't. Okay.
Nice. Thanks so much. Sammy, how about at Figma?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sammy, and at Figma, our platform is an online web-based SaaS software that allows designers to collaborate together. And, kind of the magic secret sauce is this real-time platform where you can comment on a design and it immediately shows up for other people. And so all of that core data is powered by Postgres, and it has to be really reliable, really fast and low latency so it can feel real-time. And we've grown 100x in the last 4 years. So that's where we're getting our 100 for this episode from.
Nice. Even more hundreds. We like it. And Arka, how about Notion?
Yeah, so unsurprisingly, we also use Postgres to store our data and make sure that it continues being there when our customers expect it to be. For those of you that don't know, Notion is kind of like a collaborative workspace. You can use it for documents, wikis, product management, and it has a lot of AI built in recently. So really, it's like the place where a lot of customers store their entire knowledge base and run their company or their personal use cases as well.
I just wanted to mention that I'm user of all three companies' products because, for example, Notion, I'm a big fan of lists and so on. So it's a great thing for that, like for such kind of people I am. And Figma, it's like, I actually remember I created a lot of interfaces in Figma myself. It's super cool too, and especially this real-time thing as well. And somehow I noticed Figma replaced all things I used in the past. And I just told Dirk before we started recording that every time I go with my daughter to Legoland, I see Adyen on payment machine when I pay for something. And I think, Postgres processing is there. So it's cool. Thank you for coming once again.
I love how humble you all are, assuming people might not know who your companies are as well. It's nice. Let's flip the order and let's look at how you set things up Postgres-wise. So how things were in the past, how things are set up now. I realize this might be quite an in-depth answer, and any future plans perhaps as well. So maybe at the highest level you can describe that would be awesome. Arka, should we start on your side?
Sure. So I joined Notion about a little bit over 3 years ago. And when I got there, we had actually just finished like our first sharding effort. But essentially at Notion, we run a pretty simple deployment. We use RDS, which is Amazon's managed database offering. We run Postgres on that. And we run PG Bouncer in front of our RDS cluster for connection pooling. And that's pretty much it. We do have sharding, like I mentioned, which basically is just like splitting up the data across more databases. And the logic for how to talk to the database is actually controlled by the application. So depending on some ID, we know what database to send your query to. And yeah, that's kind of how it is even today. We have a few more databases than when I started, but the overall high level architecture is pretty much the same.
Nice. I've read both of your sharding and resharding blog posts. I'll link both up in the show notes. But I'm guessing that will continue to work. Any reason it won't continue to work for the foreseeable?
Yeah, I think our plans are not really to move away from Postgres. It's worked really well for us so far, and we've got a lot of people at the company now that have built up a lot of knowledge around how to operate this thing at scale. So definitely something we want to stick with moving forward. Probably we do have to reshard in the future at some point, but in the longer term, we're actually looking at moving to more of like a cellular architecture where we can kind of deploy maybe like different versions of Notion to scale our capacity with like their own databases and caches and things like that. So we don't have to continuously spend our time resharding over and over again, because that's a very time intensive and operationally intensive kind of thing for engineers to take on. So we probably do have to reshard in the near future, but in the longer term, we hope our more like cellular architecture will be able to scale much further.
Super interesting. Sammy, let's go to you. I know you're sharding as well, but slightly differently, I believe.
Yeah, well, we definitely have a lot in common with what Arka just described. And so your blog posts were great inspiration for us as we were in the early days of horizontal sharding. So similar high level stacks, and that we're also on RDS Postgres, Amazon's managed system. And we also use PG Bouncer for connection pooling, at least for now. And where we start diverging from Notion is that I think our data model is somewhat more complex and less naturally a good fit for sharding. My understanding is Notion had shard IDs based on like the orgs or the workspaces, and that worked pretty well. But at Figma, we have a lot of data not associated with an org, and data moves quite frequently between orgs, which makes that kind of sharding model quite hard. And so we actually ended up going with a more tactical approach of, for each table, picking a set of a few shard keys that would be more optimal. And we ended up building a proxy layer so that instead of the application having to be aware of shards, we actually have this DB proxy service we built, which is a Golang service. And it's able to do all the routing and handle all of the horizontal sharding scatter gathers where a query hits many shards and then you aggregate results back. And so that's kind of been a superpower for us to have a lot more control in that layer. And long term, we have sharded our simplest highest write rate tables, but we still have a ways to go until everything is sharded. And we have to build out a lot more infrastructure to support that. So unlike Notion, we actually expect reshard operations to be quite common. And so our goal is a one-click failover where you can just hit a button and then have a reshard operation happen and transparently in the background.
Sounds like logical replication involved, but maybe we'll talk about later.
I'm so interested in this proxy layer. Did you build it yourself in-house?
We did, yes. So it's a Golang service. So it has a couple components. It has a query engine, which has a parsing layer that takes in raw SQL and transforms it to an AST. And that part we did borrow Cockroach's Postgres parser, which has mostly worked well for us with a few modifications. But then all of the logic we have like a topology layer that we've built that knows where all the databases are and what shard keys map to what tables. And so the query engine really does all that evaluation and query rewriting.
Yeah, that sounds pretty mind-blowing to me. It's really cool.
Yeah, there are a couple of projects like PGCat and SPQR which do that, but maybe when you started, they were very early stage,
yes.
Right?
Actually, to clarify, so we wish we had named this something besides DB proxy, because PGCat would not be a replacement for what we have, because we actually might use PGCat in place of PG Bouncer, because we are hitting some PG Bouncer scaling problems. I'd be curious if you guys are also running into challenges. But DB proxy is really, it's a stateless service that talks to every single database. And so a request gets routed to it, and it has a connection pooling layer which talks to a PG Bouncer or PGCat-like layer that is specific to a single host. So it's really playing more of a high-level orchestrator role.
Mm-hmm.
So cool. And I love that we've already got two different approaches to sharding, kind of one that's transparent to the application and the developers and one that's not. And I think we're about to get a third answer from Dirk's side. How are things set up at Adyen and past, present, future?
Let's start with the past. I think we had it was by far it's our most well-read blog article, and that's how to upgrade a 50 terabyte database. And when looking back on it, it's quite a while ago. So I think 2 years ago, we had an internal event, and it was like, No, it's not how you upgrade a 50 terabyte database. It's how you upgrade a terabyte database with multiple zeros in the end.
At least two, I guess, right?
Yeah, we have two zeros in the end.
And not just upgrade, but zero downtime upgrade, or like I just want to clarify, because regular upgrade is not super big problem if you can afford a couple of hours downtime to.
Yeah, we tried to think about the ordinary upgrade, but the rough calculation, it would take us like 4 or 5 weeks downtime, which didn't cut the bill.
With hard links?
No, that one is much faster, fortunately.
Right.
I think we limited to 15 minutes of downtime, and we already had a big fight for this 15 minutes, but it has to happen. And it's not even a database downtime, but it's more like all the infrastructure around it to get it fixed, which required downtime. If you look purely at Postgres, I think it was minutes, but it's not just a database you run.
I know this problem very well.
So, yeah. That's
everything around adds more and more minutes, and then sometimes hours, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious, what's the biggest individual table, or do you have partitioning under the hood there to have so many terabytes on one box?
What is the biggest table we have? I don't know, but the biggest partition is over 30 terabytes, which is a single partition.
Wow. And you don't run into vacuuming issues with that?
I think we are the most skilled company when it comes to vacuum and how to tweak vacuum.
And
Yes.
rebuilding indexes which blocks Xmin Horizon, right?
Yeah, we have seen many vacuum issues. When I started to work with Postgres and I was installing this database, and transaction wraparound was some kind of weird theoretical thing. And then I joined Adyen, and then it's something you do every week, at least.
So I yesterday asked my Twitter audience, what would you ask to people who manage like many terabytes? And one of questions was, how are you? I guess this is the case when you have problems like 30 terabytes one table. And how long is the index creation time or rebuild time? It's like days or
Yeah, days.
Days, during which Xmin Horizon is blocked, right? So we accumulate bloat in whole database for all tables, right? It's a super annoying problem.
But most of these tables are partitioned. So first we create an index per partition, and then finally in the end we create the index on the parent. Otherwise we don't make it before we hit wraparound.
Oh, wraparound, it's also a problem. But I'm talking about also vacuuming and bloat problems, so multiple problems here. Well,
Yeah.
that's super interesting experience.
It keeps us busy. But it's an honor to have these problems. But I think all three of us got these big databases because the company is very successful.
Right.
And
Right.
I think at the end of the day, having a big database is actually a design problem. You forgot to design in time for the size you need to accommodate.
See, I actually disagree. I think it's an expected problem. If you design a company too early to scale, then you're not going to have a company probably if you're trying to solve those problems when you're 5 or 10 people. I think one of the cool things about Postgres is all of our companies did get very far on one host. Like Figma existed for 7 or 8 years and was pretty successful before we had to actually start scaling out.
That's definitely true.
I agree with that, and my team helped a couple of companies who went to IPO being like on a single Postgres cluster, and they got evaluation thousands of billions of dollars having one cluster, and this was impressive. Of course, later it should be changed, but yeah. So I agree with one cluster you can scale a lot, but I would not like to be in your shoes dealing with like multi-days index rebuild and also transaction ID wraparound problems. It's like, so how do you escape from these problems today? Like 30 terabytes, one partition. It's quite difficult, right? So is it to be partitioned into smaller partitions or?
Yeah, I'm thinking about how to answer this question. I think before I joined Adyen, I tried to manage my database in a proper way. You do it by the book and by the rules, and everything is fine. And Adyen is pushing me to find which boundaries can be bended or violated without too much risk. I think that's the way to put it. We still are on the safe side, but with more knowledge, you're better able to decide when do I cross a boundary and when is it really dangerous and when is it safe to do, but not strictly advised.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the benefits of staying on a system like Postgres that you end up understanding really well is all these limits are extremely specific to the workloads and the tables, and even what works for one table at Figma doesn't work for another. And so there is a lot of just accumulated organizational knowledge that makes it easier to run these systems at scale and understand actually at what point do things get scary.
Yeah, I agree. If for example, index creation takes 1 day, but our real transaction ID doesn't grow a lot, it's not a big problem. But if it grows very fast, then we have two kinds of problems. So transaction ID wraparound and bloat accumulated. I agree. So it's very specific to particular workloads.
I want to go back to Dirk quickly because you've done such a great series of blog posts on partitioning. I'll share those. I reread them today, and part 3 promises a part 4. So I'm hopeful of getting another installment at some point. But yeah, would you say partitioning is the way you've largely scaled there, or are there other strategies? Like, are you moving data out? How are you dealing with it, and how are you planning to in the future?
Yeah, I think we started with horizontal sharding, and then within every shard, tables are partitioned. But financial transactions, you need to be able to refund them for a very, very long time. Mm-hmm. So it takes quite a long time before you can actually archive data. So we have a lot of old data which is still around. But yeah, these partitions kind of shift more back in the row, and vacuum is much easier if you don't change a lot on a partition.
Mm-hmm.
But at the moment, we are actually reaching the limit of our sharding solution again. So we basically start redesigning the entire system again.
That's really interesting, because that notion, it's interesting that you chose partitioning Postgres as your thing that got you really far. Because that notion, we actually ran into, really weird issues with dropping indexes on partition tables. But that's because I think we were running on this database was running on Postgres 12, and I think a lot of these things may have been fixed in future releases. But we actually went the opposite way, where we're we don't want Postgres partitions. Let us manage our own, because I don't know. There's some weird behavior we ran into when creating and dropping indexes, especially because some things you can't do concurrently on partition tables. Which is a problem.
Dropping indexes is a nightmare. I always tell my developers, you can create indexes on a partition table, but if you want to drop them, I come after you.
Yeah. Fun problem.
Actually, Dirk, you said something earlier about knowing which rules you can kind of bend or break. One of the ones you mentioned in those posts was around adding check constraints. And so adding them in a not valid state, but then not running validate afterwards. I think you mentioned just updating the system catalog. And that's such a cool trick, but how? Yeah, I guess you have to become comfortable.
We used this trick 15 years ago when validate was not an option. So something like that, we used it. But it was undocumented thing. Don't do it if you're not owning database. For example, if you're a consultant, this is not something you should recommend, because who knows what will happen next. If you own database, if you work inside company, it's probably okay. It's not official. By the way, I wanted to emphasize problems we just started touching. Most people who listen to us don't have, right? Because it's extreme problems.
I'm not completely sure. I think partitioning becomes useful for a lot of people way before you hit a limit where you have to. So if you're listening to this podcast and you think partitioning is too far away, just think again. Because if you do it now, when you have all the time in the world to figure it out, find a good strategy, then you don't end up with a huge partition, a small partition, weirdly partitioning things. So I would say just start in time.
I'm on the same page with you here, because you mentioned this rule 100 gigabytes as threshold when you need to start partitioning. Same rule we also apply everywhere. So if you exceed 100 gigabytes, it's time to partition. I agree.
Interesting. We have a lot of tables larger than that aren't partitioned, but probably about a terabyte is what we aim for max for our largest shards, although we have one 16 terabyte table today. But another interesting topic that I think is more relevant to people are upgrades. We have built this no downtime tooling that we've mostly used for reshard and horizontal sharding operations, but more recently we've been using it for no downtime major version upgrades with the ability to roll back if you run into problems. And so I think that's something that could be interesting for anyone who's running Postgres. Upgrades are always a hard thing to do.
Yeah. By the way, we forgot to mention that ADN is on self-managed situation. It's not on RDS, right? Because it's very different.
Yeah.
Is it? Yeah. I'm very curious how you did this for RDS case, not using blue-green deployments, right? Just fully.
At least, at least today. Well, Blue Green only very recently became available for Postgres.
Right.
Last year, it was only really MySQL. And so we'll probably explore it going forward. One blocker that actually we're talking to the RDS team today is our rollback, or
Exactly.
there is no way to roll back. And
Yeah,
that
that's
is
the
something
wrong blue-green deployments idea. It should be symmetric, and when you switch over, reverse replication should be installed immediately. And without this, you don't have rollback plan, right?
Exactly.
It means data loss.
Yeah, so that's what our failover operation does. I think it's also nice to have more control when you do it locally, because we're able to, for instance, do a no downtime replicas failover. And because most of our P0 critical workflows read from replicas, that means that most failovers don't actually incur any downtime. Whereas, if you're using a managed thing like Blue Green, you lose that kind of control.
Yeah, well, I'm super curious about details here, but maybe it should be a separate discussion. And first of all, I wanted to thank you, all of you. Like, we invited you because you shared very great posts.
Mm-hmm.
So this knowledge sharing is super important. So I would be happy to see more and more coming. And maybe if we talk more and exchange with ideas, we could collect better materials. For example, how to do zero downtime upgrades, because I know a very good recipe for self-managed Postgres, but I don't know for RDS, because they don't allow you to control recovery target LSN. So I'm very curious to talk about details, but maybe in a separate discussion, because I know Michael has different plan, not to talk half an hour about upgrades.
Well, maybe we could actually do a quick lightning round of which major version each of you are currently running, if you know and are happy to share.
Is it a single version only, or?
Well, also a good question. Sammy, are you happy to share that one?
Sure, I can definitely talk about that. Well, we are newly, as of 2 months ago, fully on PG-13. So we had a couple of PG-11 very legacy boxes. There were some of our earliest, largest databases. And that's actually was the main motivation for building out this upgrade workflow, was to get those into PG-13. And we would love to use some of the features that are available in like PG-15, PG-16. And so we're probably going to look into fleet-wide upgrades sometime next year to get to a newer version. But this is where this one-click upgrades or failovers really matters, because today it's quite toilsome and it would be pretty painful to upgrade the whole fleet.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Arka?
Yeah, we're like 90% on Postgres 15. And it is my life's mission to get us that final 10% over. Like most of our databases are on actually Postgres 15. We finished that upgrade last year. And yeah, we really wanted some of the features that I think got introduced maybe after Postgres 14, especially around being able to filter the replication stream, because that's something we want to use in the future, probably if we want to reshard. That'll be a very useful thing for us. And just wanted to touch on Sammy's point a little bit. We actually use the exact same kind of, I think, failover that you guys use as well at Figma, based on PG Bouncer and with the reversibility as well. And that's something that has been really, really surprisingly amazing.
Yeah, you mean PG Bouncer post resume? I guess this is why you don't use RDS proxy being on RDS, right?
Correct.
Because it doesn't have post resume. Yeah, that's great. I also was surprised last year that it can handle really heavy workloads.
Yeah,
with just a few seconds spike of latency, you can upgrade and switch over to different primary.
Yeah, it was one of those things where when we were writing out the tech spec for it, I was like, is this thing gonna actually work?
The problem with this, by the way, there are no good materials about this, proving nobody say it's like public secret. Nobody talks about it somehow, but it works really well. So we need more materials proving that post resume works well in PG Bouncer.
Yeah, it's been great for us. We have some PG Bouncer scaling problems, but everything on the failovers, PG pause, PG resume side has been flawless.
That's so good to hear. And finally, Dirk, on the major version side of things.
We are fully on 13, and we're having discussions about the next version we want to upgrade to, because every version has nice things. I want certain partitioning functionality. Yeah. A colleague wants more logical replication functionality. So, of course, 17 would be the ideal, but then do we really want to run 17 already with the biggest clusters we have. So yeah, to be continued.
And I think also the fact that, I mean, Notion being on 15 was somewhat of a surprise to me. I think because of these major version upgrade challenges, I see so many companies, even at the cutting edge of what Postgres can do, lagging several years behind because upgrades are so difficult. So I know we won't get a chance to discuss all the reasons why, but I think it's proof because we're all like lagging.
Yeah. Well, I actually think it's not for us so much fear of newer versions. I actually worked in MySQL before Postgres, and MySQL major version upgrades were truly terrifying. These were like 2 or 3 year long efforts where you found a lot of major incompatibilities. But one thing I love about Postgres is it is mostly backwards compatible across major versions. And so it's not so much that we're scared of the newer ones as versus we can't take downtime to do these upgrades. And so it's much more the manual toil.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the case for a lot of people. So last one I was going to ask each of you is if you had a funny or scary, and I don't know which one I want most, story that you can share with us related to your scaling. Any of you got one prepared already? Feel free to jump in. Or Nikolai?
Lightweight logs, log manager, multi-exact transactions, multi-exact IDs, and so on, like something like that. Maybe. No?
Yeah, I think we definitely got bitten by the log manager, like most people who start doing partitioning. It's we started partitioning and we did a good job, and I built this framework around partitioning. By the way, Michael, the 4th blog post is we are writing it at the moment.
Yes.
So it will be there. It's a nice ID. Now I lost the thread of my story. Oh yeah, partitioning.
So sounds like
suddenly,
lack of prepared statements.
No, we did have the prepared statements. But you know everything about prepared statements, right? Where you try it 5 times and then the optimizer decides, do we go with the generic plan or the custom plan? But we also created a lot of partitioned and a lot of partition tables. So we definitely ran out of logs. And our CPU, basically every time we created a new partition for a table, the CPU usage jumped 10%. But jumping 10% was fine because we had a lot of CPU to spare. So by the time it alerted, it was pretty high. And then we're looking back and we see these jumps of 10% and 10% and 10%. And then we're looking like the next jump of 10%, that's above 100. And then we are not in a good position. So then we had this small window with all kind of things prepared, like don't create any partitions anymore on this cluster. But can we break open partition boundaries so we can basically extend the final partition to hold more data? And then we were researching this problem, like, why is the CPU usage jumping like this? And in the end, we started to force the optimizer to pick generic plans because custom plans were faster in execution, but definitely not at prepare time. So we won like a few milliseconds in execution time, but we were paying like 100 milliseconds in prepare time. And that was really heating up the CPUs.
Because during planning, Postgres logs all indexes and tables, all partitions, all its indexes if partition pruning is not working, so it's terrible.
Yeah, so you're running out of your fastpath logs because you need to log like 20 partitions and 20 indexes on these partitions for a single table, and then you join with a partition table, and with a partition table, all these logs go to the log manager, which is burning CPU cycles.
You're in a good club of a bunch of companies who experienced this over a couple of last years.
Yeah, I was going to say, we hit this for vacuuming on our bigger tables. When you get above like 4 terabytes, you start seeing that at the end of the cycle when you run analyze and the cache gets cleared out, and then you suddenly have this custom plans that are 5x more expensive. And that's when CPU spikes to 100% for a few seconds.
I have a question to all of you. When you have these problems, do you discuss this with people who can influence this? I mean, hackers somehow. Do you raise these problems in mailing lists or somewhere else where hackers live?
We work with AWS support quite a bit.
Well, some hackers there are for sure, but not all of them, right?
Yeah. I mean, we're good friends with the AWS RDS team, and they have actually a team that contributes to Postgres. So we try to leverage them to get some of these patches in. But it's honestly a lot of us reading the source code ourselves as well and trying to figure out workarounds.
By the way, I just last week, I think I realized that SLRU patches created originally by Andrei Borodin, which will be in Postgres 17, they are already adopted by AWS RDS Aurora for a couple of years, almost. I was super surprised. Actually, Andrei was also surprised. But you're not going to use Aurora, right? Instead of regular RDS.
Maybe. I think, for Notion, I think we are actually starting to look into if Aurora makes sense, mostly because the AWS team promises a lot better replication for global replicas compared to the RDS built-in replicas. So it's something we're considering, but we haven't actually used before. So was curious if any of you have any experience with that or like scaling read replicas in general, because that's also something we haven't leveraged too much at Notion yet.
Well, less scaling read replicas, but actually my scary story was going to be around moving things more to replicas, because at the same time that we were growing 100x, we were dealing with a lot more pressure on the reliability of our system and trying to move towards 4.9s globally as a company. And so our application, because it's a web browser and we have a kind of single-threaded Ruby monolith that serves a lot of traffic, what is very latency sensitive, that if your database slows down for a minute, then the whole application can back up and your whole website can be down. And so that was one of our biggest reliability risks and most persistent pain points is our RDS does have some big latency spikes on EBS that most customers don't notice, but we were really hitting. And so our two big solutions there were to basically remove writes from our most business critical routes wherever possible and put all reads or 99% of reads onto replicas for these P0 user workflows. And then we build out replica hedging. So every request hits 2 replicas and returns the first results that are successful there, which allows us to tolerate any one replica being down. And that's been hugely useful. We also got onto IO2 for EBS, which has been a game changer for EBS reliability.
Oh, nice. How many replicas do you guys normally have off one database?
Today, there are only 2 large replicas. In the future, we want to move towards more smaller replicas.
We have multiple, let's put it that way. Reading from a replica is much harder when it is about financial data, because you want to have the correct data, and it might just been updated. So we try to move a lot of stuff to the replicas, but it's kind of hard.
Yeah, that would definitely be a problem for financial data.
Are we talking about asynchronous replicas only, or maybe some semi-synchronous or quorum commit approach?
We have both.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, also cache invalidation. I think that's one of the bigger concerns for us at Notion, because we're super, super heavy users of Memcache, and like reasoning about how that works for replicas is another thing that we don't really want to do, but we have to do. I don't really have like a super scary story, but actually it's something I've been working on recently, which we ran into some surprising behavior. So maybe it's just fun to talk about. So recently at Notion, we've been trying to upgrade that last 10%. And of course, those databases are just the hardest because they're just so big. So we're trying to upgrade this partition table that is around 20 terabytes with like 16 partitions on each database. So, each partition is about like a terabyte-ish. And we were having trouble getting this to work with just regular logical replication. So we actually started exploring DMS, which is like an AWS service that lets you migrate data between 2 separate databases. Side note, it's actually super cool. Like you can go from like a completely random system to like another new system. It doesn't have to be like Postgres to Postgres only. I don't know how good it is at huge scale.
It just requires a department in your company to manage.
Yeah. So originally I was like, oh yeah, I can do this. And then it's been like 4 months now and I'm still like, oh my God, this is a lot. But anyway, one of the problems we ran into was actually related to Postgres bloat. Because it turns out with DMS, you get a lot of kind of knobs that you can tune for the concurrency of like the copy. And that goes pretty fast. Like we're able to copy, a terabyte of data in maybe 12, 14 hours with the way we have our DMS set up. But the thing we noticed after we set up the target databases is somehow the data size, so we use PG Analyze as like our Postgres monitoring tool. And like we noticed that the data size literally on disk was like 3 times larger on the new tables for some reason than the old one. And, we were going from like Postgres 12 to Postgres 15. So at first we thought maybe it was like a toast compression thing, because we know that the toast compression algorithm changed between, I think, 12 to 14 or something. It went from like PGLZ to LZ4 or something. I don't remember exactly, but I know that changed. So I was like, oh, like, is it the new post compression that's causing like the data size to be literally much larger on disk, which obviously leads to much worse latency because then every one of your queries are doing much more IO, which is bad and slow.
Buffers.
Yeah. So, we tried a few tests with like changing the compression back to the old one. We weren't fully convinced still. But it turns out actually we were just hitting like bloat. And this clicked when I was actually listening to one of your earlier podcasts, I think, on Postgres bloat. And I realized that our vacuums weren't actually fully completing on the new table because there was just so many new transactions being written, the vacuum could not keep up, which meant that the bloat just kept on accumulating and accumulating. And on top of that, a lot of the data in this table was being toasted because they're just JSON B columns. So anyway, it was just like 2 weeks of investigation to be like, oh, we should just run a full vacuum. And turns out that like brought the data size right back to what it should be. So it was a fun little kind of investigation recently.
It sounds like PGAnalyze doesn't tell you about Xmin Horizon and proper like things like why vacuum can be lagging and skipping some dead tuples that cannot be deleted. PGAnalyze has very good vacuum dashboard. So I'm very curious, does it speak about Xmin Horizon?
It actually does point those things out. We just didn't have the new databases in PGAnalyze yet because we're like, okay, we're not using production traffic on these, so we don't need it there. When we put it there, we realized that, oh yeah, like the vacuums are falling behind.
I'm just personally myself very annoyed that Postgres monitoring systems lack better Xmin Horizon and long transactions, which is two separate things basically. Alerts. Long transaction can happen and nobody tells you. It's not the right thing if you have sometimes two Postgres monitorings and nobody tells you about this. So I'm curious if PGAnalyze has some alerts.
It does.
Okay.
It sends you an email if, for example, you've had any transaction running for over an hour.
Right, but if you use Logical, it's not the only reason of Xmin Horizon being installed. So, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
I don't know. For us, like PGAnalyze has been really great, actually. Like I love working with that team. Shout out to Lucas. Like he's been so amazing working.
And also content, again, back to content sharing. Lucas does a great job and his team does a great job.
Oh yeah, Lucas is awesome. I talked to him as well a few weeks ago, and everything in PGAnalyze, their blogs are really great. Okay, I think it's interesting you guys had the data copy be such a big bottleneck. We also had a big pain point there when we were first doing vertical sharding. And what we ended up finding out is we kind of went into the source code for Postgres and logical replication and realized that it's really, really expensive to have indexes on your database table while you're doing logical replication and much faster to drop the indexes and then recreate them afterwards. So it went from like weeks to a day for a multi-terabyte data copy when you drop all of your indexes and foreign keys.
Yeah, that's a great insight.
Yeah, I'm also curious if you talk about regular logical replica provisioning when data is copied logically, or maybe, for example, there is a binary copy option, and also there is, if you need it for upgrades, for example, or you need majority of data, sometimes it's better to convert physical replica to logical, which I hope soon will become standard recipe inside Postgres itself, but now it's only possible if you orchestrate it properly. I'm very curious if you do this trick on RDS, both of you, or no.
We rely a lot on logical replication for all of our core failover tooling, so we haven't really explored physical replication. I'm not sure if we really can because of EDS.
On RDS, it's possible if you apply so-called Instacart recipe, but it's there are debates about is it safe to do it. Actually, Lucas blog posted about it as well recently.
You're talking about the thing where you like create a replication slot, take a backup, and then like advance the replication slot?
Yeah, either this or on RDS only this, yes.
Yeah.
On self-managed, you can play with recovery target LSN, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, is it only Instacart or what?
We've actually used that before too. So actually, before we knew the trick that Sammy just told us about with the indexes, we could never get logical replication to catch up ever to our tables. So we actually ended up using the Instacart trick to do our first round of upgrades that I ever did at Notion. It worked well. I think one of the problems you run into with that, though, is similarly, when you provision the new database off the backup, you have to do another extra step of actually dropping the indexes again. Because even just catching up with logical replication from the point that you took the backup for a sufficiently large database still took us like a day or so just to catch up the changes between the replication time and that thing. So I think, yeah, that trick could work really well. Probably combined with dropping the indexes would speed it up significantly. But actually for us, after that, we've always just used regular logical replication, and it's been fast enough if we can provision the schemas without any indexes.
Actually, dropping indexes lead us to one topic I wanted not to miss. Huge wall volumes generated and index write amplification. Anyone can tell anything about these problems, like experience something about it, or like because this is one of the key criticism points from Uber when they posted this infamous article, right? Postgres has index write amplification. We have hot updates, but still it's a problem, right? Actually, Dirk, I remember article about maybe a couple of years ago about fill factor, right? Is it still the tool you use actively?
Well, fill factor is not a tool, right? It's just a parameter you can set for your tables and your indexes.
Right. But the tool is to use it to provoke more hot updates.
Yeah. If we lose hot updates like we did last week, it's like we doubled our wall usage. So that's already, and that was only for single table. For some reason, with the next release or the new release, we had a longer running query, which means pretty long because it was holding back hot updates. And that means like you just double the wall volume on your system. But we have many tables, right? And then only this single table is responsible or becomes responsible for half the wall of the entire cluster. For me, that's an amazing number that you can generate or skip creating that amount of wall when using hot updates. So yeah, if we are having heavily updated tables, we always try to find the right fill factor. I've been trying to get this formula, like what tables do you need to fill factor and how high do you set it? And it's still a mystery to me. Because we have some tables which do fine at 95% fill factor, and some do really great at 70%.
And also you need to protect this table from new index being created and losing all hot updates somehow, right? If developers decide to add one more index.
I can't.
Right.
I have no way to force my developers.
Okay, I'm actually curious. A big pain point we have right now is for really expensive index creations, there's no good way of throttling it. So if it eats a lot of your IOPS, there's not really a Postgres way we've found to tune this so that it, maybe you want the index creation to happen much more slowly in the background over a few days for some really large tables.
But it will hold Xmin Horizon again. This infamous problem from...
Sure, but I mean, maybe 3 days of holding that is better than an hour of the website being down.
This might be a stupid question, but would reducing maintenance work mem can you do that in a session? Would that help?
More disk.io maybe.
Yeah, maybe, I think we have the minimum. Yeah, we're only using one thread for the maintenance settings there, but it has been a couple of times enough to spike our IOPS to basically the RDS limits.
I always want indexes to be created faster.
Yeah.
But it requires faster disk.io capabilities, of course.
This is what I love about TrueScale is you just hit trade-offs. You hit times where one thing's best and you hit other times where the complete opposite is best. So yeah, I'm really conscious of time. You've all been amazing. Thank you so much for joining. I wanted to give you each an opportunity to say anything else you wanted to add or forgot to say, or feel free to shout out if you're hiring, that kind of thing.
Let me ask one more technical question. Everyone uses foreign keys everywhere or decided to drop some of them or everywhere, right?
No, I will actually say something about this. I think honestly, we use probably Postgres in the least interesting way possible. For our sharded databases, we don't have foreign keys. We don't do joins. We don't have any triggers. We don't have really anything that can we don't have any generated columns. We limit so many things that you can do that we're basically using Postgres as a blob store at this point, which is why we end up with really giant databases with a lot of indexes. But the queries are quite simple, actually, to retrieve the data. And I think that's been probably one of the primary reasons that I've actually, and my team has actually been able to kind of keep up with the growth of our Postgres cluster, because we're able to do things like resharding without having to, talk to every team at the company and be like, can you please change this query? Can you please not do this thing? I think a lot of people get really excited about using all the fun features of relational databases, but actually you can use it in a very boring way, but still get some of the benefits of relational databases, such as consistency and things like that. So I think that's like my one trick to high scale with any database, not just Postgres, MySQL, and really any other thing that you can think of. It's good to be aware of some of the pitfalls of the more interesting features.
So no foreign keys.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Not allowed.
Okay. Any more input?
Yeah, we do allow foreign keys on the sharding key. And similarly, we allow joins on the sharding key. So for us, it's a matter of picking a sharding key so that most operations are happening within that. And then that allows us to avoid rewriting a lot of application logic.
Smart.
We also have foreign keys, and at POSET, which is in 2 weeks' time, a little bit less, I tell you how to find a proper partitioning strategy. Because up to now, I've been focusing on partitioning a single table in the best way possible, but I kind of forgot to look at the bigger picture. So all my tables are partitioned slightly different with different partition boundaries. And then the entire system becomes a bit messy. So now we are working on basically straighten out all the partition boundaries, because then the joining and the foreign keys work much more efficient. And so is partition pruning.
Clever.
And I kid you not, some queries became 20 times faster by straightening out partition boundaries.
Wow.
Wow. I'll make my last plug on the hiring side. My team is hiring really aggressively right now. We're basically trying to double this year. And in particular, we just had an awesome senior staff engineer become a manager. And so we have a big gap in senior staff principal type engineers, folks who have worked at scale before. So if you're interested in those problems, please reach out to me or come apply.
Notion is also hiring. But my pitch is definitely not as refined as Sammy's. But if you want to come work on fun problems, check out our careers page.
I actually think might be the first time in 20 years we are not expanding my team this year.
Oh, wow. But we should plug Dirk's talk at POSET, which you can all watch. So I'll include links to all of these things. One final thank you from me. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining us for episode 100.
Yeah, thank you so much. I wanted just to once again say thank you for knowledge sharing. Super important. Looking forward to more, definitely, to more blog posts and maybe some runbooks published. I don't know, things you use in your daily work maintaining these large databases, large Postgres databases. So super curious to see more from you and maybe to collaborate on some things like some knowledge and exchanging and so on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you. It's really cool to be here, especially in such good company.
Yeah, this was a really fun conversation. Thanks for getting us all together.
Yeah, thanks again. I really enjoyed this. Hope to be back on the future as well.
This was the best episode number 100 we could imagine.
Agreed.